Our polar heavy haul train was tearing across the ice field with thousands of tons of high explosive ammunition when the tracks ahead suddenly twisted in a bizarre way. A massive black and red beast, huge as a mountain, appeared in front of the train. The driver slammed on the brakes with all his might, but the thousands of tons train, driven by terrifying inertia, plowed straight into its writhing, squirming mass. A massive shockwave instantly flipped our escort vehicle and sent it flying. My mouth was filled with a strong metallic taste, mixed with broken teeth and iron shards stuck in my throat. I couldn't spit it out or swallow it. My left leg was pinned under an overturned snowmobile, completely numb from the knee down, with only my ankle throbbing in sharp pain. My ears were filled with a piercing screech, making my head buzz. Our tracked vehicle had just flipped, and I was thrown out, my forehead smashing hard against the frozen ground. Now my entire eye socket was swollen and aching. That's when I saw it. The train's headlights were still on, their beams cutting through the blizzard, shining straight ahead. On the tracks coiled a massive monster, black and red all over, segmented, and terrifyingly huge. I was less than 20 meters away, looking up, unable to see its top. It straddled both tracks, piled up in place. Its skin was constantly moving, muscles bulging and rolling underneath, surging back and forth repeatedly. It looked like countless snakes were trapped inside the skin, desperately trying to burrow out. The train couldn't stop. It was still charging forward. The screech of the wheels slowly turned into a harsh, tearing sound. When the train's front hit, there was no explosion. The front end embedded itself directly into the monster's flesh. The monster's body caved into a huge pit, tightly wrapping around the train's nose. In an instant, all sound vanished completely. The wind, the snow, the wheels all gone. Only a dull, sticky noise came from inside the monster's body, like the sound of a stomach that had been empty for too long, churning violently. My leg was still pinned, my ears ringing. I gritted my teeth and forced my left leg out from under the snowmobile. My knee made a dull pop, sending a sharp pain through me, but I couldn't care less. The monster in front of me kept writhing. The train's front stuck fast in its body. The earlier sparks were gone, leaving only the sound of the train's metal being crushed, creaking loudly. My name is Mac. I'm just a regular soldier, assigned to train escort duty. This all started 3 days ago. The higher-ups called us into an unmarked meeting room and said they were sending a polar heavy haul train to deliver supplies to a research station up north. I was half asleep at first, until they slapped the manifest on the table. The 12 sealed cars behind us were loaded with high explosive ammunition and napalm, totaling several thousand tons. I asked the officer right there why we were transporting so much dangerous stuff. He just said it was pre-stock supplies, in case of an unexpected exoskeleton invasion from the north, to hold off an initial wave of attacks. He didn't even look at me when he said it, just stared at the map on the wall. I knew something was off, but I'm just a soldier, so I didn't push it. Before we left, old Tom, the train driver, kept grumbling. He had a bad knee that would ache sharply whenever the weather or pressure changed, more accurate than any forecast. I asked him how it was this time, and he said it felt like a bunch of broken glass was stuck in his knee, unbearable. Then he turned and went into the train's cab. After we set off, our tracked vehicle followed a kilometer behind the train, with snowmobiles flanking it on both sides. The whole way was just a white, endless ice field, boring and monotonous. My teammate Wilson sat across from me the whole time, repeatedly cleaning his gun, barely speaking, the most reliable guy. The demolitions expert, Joey, leaned against the window, dozing off, quiet as could be. Not long after, we spotted something unusual by the tracks. At first, I thought it was just a regular snowdrift, a lumpy mound. But as we got closer, I saw a dark red color underneath the snow, blackened from freezing, looking really eerie. Joey, who had been dozing, snapped awake and nudged me with his elbow, pointing for me to look. We quickly stopped and got out to check. On the ground lay half a reindeer carcass. Everything above its chest was gone. The remaining lower half was flattened, its flesh, bones, snow, and gravel frozen into a red block of ice. There were no splattered bloodstains, and the break was incredibly clean, as if the upper body had been completely absorbed by something. Wilson crouched down to examine it closely, pointing at the break. He said the muscles there were stretched out, and the fracture was embedded with transparent crystalline particles. He picked one up, and the crystal didn't melt on his fingertip. He concluded it wasn't ice, probably some kind of special salt crystal. Just then, a strange sound came through. A sound came from the direction of the tracks ahead, muffled and indistinct, like the call of a deep-sea whale or a ship's horn in thick fog. It spread across the ground, making the frozen earth beneath our feet tremble slightly. The comms on the tracked vehicle suddenly crackled to life, and Old Tom's hoarse shout burst out. "Brake! Hit the brakes! There's something moving on the tracks." We immediately sprinted toward the tracks. At that moment, the raging blizzard abruptly stopped, visibility instantly jumping from a dozen meters to hundreds, the view crystal clear. I finally saw the colossal monster on the tracks. As it moved, it was like an entire mountain ridge had grown legs and was crawling. It was toweringly tall, forcing me to crane my neck to see its top, with most of its body hidden in the distant black clouds, making it impossible to estimate its full length. Its body was made up of bulging segments, each one taut and glossy, a dark, blackish-red color like long, stagnant blood clots. This thing had no face. On its foremost segment, there was only a vertical slit lined with outward-facing, yellow, inverted cartilage that looked utterly terrifying. No one gave orders, but we all instinctively raised our guns, frozen in place, too scared to move. The monster completely ignored us, its full attention fixed on the tracks. It lowered its body, coiling tightly around the rails, its segments intertwining and squeezing together like a python locking onto its prey before striking. Then, its black-red skin slowly darkened, eventually turning into the exact rust color of the railroad ties. It was camouflaging itself as part of the track, waiting for the train to crash into it. The next second, the ground shook violently as the train barreled toward us. The thunderous roar of wheels grinding against the rails rapidly approached from behind. I turned to look at the cab. The headlights cast light from below, distorting Old Tom's face into a tense, twisted mask. Old Tom had been running this polar route for years, and he always said his biggest fear was an obstacle suddenly appearing on the tracks. The train was too fast to stop. Through the bulletproof glass, I locked eyes with Old Tom. I clearly saw him open his mouth, trying to shout something. Then, the train slammed straight into the monster. At the moment of impact, I couldn't hear a thing. My ears were completely blocked, as if filled with cement, cutting off all sound. I could only watch the horrifying scene unfold. The thousands of tons locomotive crashed headlong into the monster's flesh, and the immense force was instantly absorbed by its body. The monster's fleshy segments collapsed inward, its skin stretched taut and shiny, then suddenly caved in, forming a deep pit several meters wide. The train was stuck fast inside, unable to move. A few seconds later, a piercing sound exploded. It wasn't the crash itself, but the noise from the rear cars. The train's wheels had locked, but the massive inertia pushed the cars forward, one slamming into the next. The wheels screeched against the rails, a tearing sound like snapping raw iron. The rear of the train bounced half a meter into the air, then slammed back onto the tracks, ripping the rails from the ties and twisting them into a tangled mess. A powerful shockwave sent me flying, my back crashing hard onto the frozen ground. It knocked all the air out of my lungs, and I gasped, mouth wide open, struggling to catch my breath for a long moment. I scrambled to my feet and saw something seeping from the monster's wound. The gash from the collision opened slightly, the flesh on both sides peeling back, but there was no blood. Instead, a thick, pale yellow liquid oozed out, dripping down the train's metal shell. As the liquid hit the cold steel, it immediately sizzled, and the hard metal began to soften and warp. The once buckled body of the train and the steel around the bulletproof glass started to droop and wrinkle like candle wax in the sun. "Move! Move!" Joey grabbed me from behind. I turned and saw that Joey and Wilson were still alive, but Old Tom was trapped in the cab, completely enveloped by the monster's flesh beyond saving. I didn't dare dwell on it and quickly retreated with them. My gun was still slung over me. I grabbed it, backing away while looking for cover. The overturned tracked vehicle was still there, its engine roaring, tracks spinning uselessly, flinging snow everywhere. The three of us ducked behind it for cover. Just then, the monster moved. It raised its massive front half, all its fleshy segments tensing up, the muscle bundles beneath the skin twisting together, making a wet, creaking sound like a rope being pulled taut. I looked up. A single segment was as tall as a two-story building, and it lifted 3 or 4 segments at once, its colossal body soaring into the sky, its top nowhere in sight. Immediately, the folds along its sides, which had been flush against its skin, unfurled completely, revealing rows of waxy yellow bone spikes. Their texture resembled aged ivory, with needle-sharp tips that gleamed coldly in the snow. These spikes protruded from deep within its muscles, stretching the surrounding skin taut at their bases, a sight both grotesque and terrifying. Fire! Wilson was the first to react, his voice a raw shout. All three of us pulled the triggers simultaneously. Our rifles bucked violently in our hands, muzzles climbing with each shot. The gunfire wasn't loud, just flat, sharp cracks, similar to the sound of target practice. But the sound of the bullets striking the creature was utterly different. I've shot all kinds of targets, steel plates, sandbags, and each surface produces a distinct sound. Yet when the bullets hit this thing, there was no echo at all. It was like stones sinking in a soft mud, producing only dull, wet thuds. Dozens of rounds were fired, but at best they only shallowly embedded in its outer layer. Most of the bullets remained half exposed, like matchsticks stuck in soft rubber, completely failing to penetrate its body. The creature ignored our attack entirely, showing not the slightest reaction. It lifted its massive bulk and slowly pressed toward the first rail car. That car was loaded with napalm, all packed in steel drums and secured with chains. The creature coiled its body around the car, its segments stacking layer upon layer. As soon as the first loop tightened, the thick steel walls of the car emitted a piercing screech of compression, exactly like the sound of crushing an empty soda can by hand. In the next moment, it began to constrict. The sturdy steel walls visibly crumpled inward, not slowly deforming, but collapsing in whole sections. Rivets securing the car's frame popped out violently, some flying over a dozen meters away. One even punched through the door of a nearby, tracked vehicle, embedding itself in the metal. The steel beams on the car's roof bent under the pressure, then snapped at their limits, fracturing explosively. The pungent smell of gasoline instantly flooded the air, choking and dizzying. Napalm drums were crushed, and thick, reddish-brown fuel oozed from the car's cracks, drenching the creature's body. Its skin, soaked in gasoline, darkened to a deeper hue, gleaming with an oily sheen. Frantically, I tried to reload, my hand shaking so badly I could barely align the magazine with the slot. Joey's gunfire continued to ring out, and Wilson kept shouting something. My ears were filled with a high-pitched ringing, drowning out all sound. I could only see their faces twisted and strained, their mouths opening and closing. The creature kept tightening its coils. An entire heavy-duty rail car, dozens of tons of steel and cargo, was utterly compacted and crushed by its force. What was once a complete train car was now a smooth, solid lump of iron. It loosened its grip and casually tossed the heavy mass onto the frozen ground. The lump landed with a deep thud, gouging a crater, rolled twice, and lay still. The creature's segments were now coated in gasoline, and pale yellow mucus continued to seep out, mixing with the fuel and dripping along its body folds. Without pause, it began to move forward again, approaching the second car loaded with napalm. And we had to remember, there were still 12 more cars just like it. Our rifles were empty, magazines spent. With each step the creature took, the frozen earth beneath it rumbled dully. Its bone spikes scraped the ground, carving deep grooves into the hard permafrost. Crouched behind the overturned tracked vehicle, I stared at my empty rifle, the screech of crushing steel still echoing in my ears. Wilson turned to look at me, and I met his gaze. His lips moved, and though I still couldn't hear, I clearly read the shape of his words. He was saying, "We can't fight this thing." Just then, the creature suddenly stopped. Its slow, constricting movements froze completely in an instant. It remained coiled around the second car, muscles taut and bulging, but applied no further pressure. The muscles beneath its skin quivered faintly, and all aggressive motion ceased. All three of us stayed perfectly still, not daring to make a sound. Joey still held his rifle aimed at the creature, but his finger had long left the trigger. Crouched behind the tracked vehicle, my legs numb and tingling, I tried to shift slightly. My knee let out a sharp, cracking pop. On the silent ice field, snow began to fall again. At first just scattered flakes, but soon it grew thicker, melting instantly on our faces. Snowflakes drifted onto the creature's warm skin, vaporizing into mist. As enough accumulated, a thin layer of snow settled over its dark red hide, slightly softening its monstrous appearance. Wilson removed his damaged helmet and wiped his face roughly with his sleeve. His throat had been scraped during the crash, making his voice breathy and raspy. Old Tom must have pulled the brake at the last moment. The whole train's lost power. I didn't reply, my nerves stretched to the breaking point. He swallowed, his atoms apple bobbing, and continued in a low voice. The creature most likely locks onto targets through vibrations or electromagnetic fields. Once the train lost power and the signal vanished, it stopped. Beside him, Joey nodded emphatically. His face was smeared with black soot from the gasoline fumes, his expression tense. Yet he forcefully agreed with the assessment. We were all forcing ourselves to believe it. Only then did we have a chance to survive. I tore off the radio from my gear, twisting the knob repeatedly to adjust it. Inside, there was only the constant hiss of static, no signal coming through. Old Tom's communication had long since been completely cut off. I raised my gun, staring intently at the creature through the scope. The muscles on its body were constantly twitching at a high frequency. Not random spasms, but orderly undulations that rippled along its segmented body, one section passing to the next, rolling back and forth like surging waves. The vertical gash, torn open by the train's impact, remained gaping, the cartilage at its edges repeatedly opening and closing. Each time it opened, a puff of hot air was expelled, instantly turning into white mist in the cold. A strange odor drifted over with the wind, unmistakable even from dozens of meters away. First, the raw, grassy scent of fresh vegetation, underpinned by a thick, cloying sweetness, like the smell of stagnant, rotting water. The two foul odors mingled, making us all uneasy. Joey immediately furrowed his brow and raised a hand to cover his nose and mouth. I looked through the scope again, peering deep into the creature's gash. Layer upon layer of cartilage grew denser the further I looked, and behind the deepest cartilage, I saw a faint, indistinct outline. The thing was wrapped in a translucent membrane, its exact shape unclear, but it was constantly writhing. The membrane swelled and contracted with the opening and closing of the gash, the thing inside pushing outward, stretching the membrane until it turned pale. I blinked, wiping the salt frost from my eyelashes, and looked again. The outline had become clearer and was slowly shifting outward. Suddenly, Joey reached out and slapped my shoulder, startling me into tensing up. He didn't speak, only pointed toward the direction of the train car. Following his gaze, I saw the damaged gasoline tank still leaking thick, reddish-brown oil. The viscous fluid flowed down the creature's body folds, tracing a path in the snow that stretched directly toward us. Snowflakes landing on the gasoline melted instantly, unable to cover the fuel. The oil trail had already crossed more than half the distance between us and the creature and was steadily creeping forward. Joey looked down at his feet. The gasoline was only about 10 meters away. In his hand, he clutched a battery torn from the damaged power unit of the tracked vehicle. Its casing was cracked, and the core inside continuously smoked and hissed. He raised the battery, looking at me, then at Wilson, on the snowy ground. The reddish-brown gasoline continued to trickle slowly toward our feet. Joey suddenly swung his arm in a wide arc, hurling the smoking battery with all his might. It flipped several times in the air before landing precisely in the center of the gasoline puddle in the snow. The next second, a blue flame erupted. The entire puddle was instantly engulfed in blue fire, the flames racing along the oil trail on the ground, swiftly darting toward the underside of the train car. The fire raced across the snow, and as soon as it reached beneath the creature's body, a deafening explosion erupted. All the ruptured napalm tanks detonated at once. A raging inferno shot up over 10 meters high, completely enveloping the train car that had been crushed into a lump of metal. The thick iron plates glowed red hot, the entire mass shining brightly. The heat of the flames washed over us, scorching our faces. Snowflakes drifting down from the sky melted before they could land, turning into fine droplets of hot water that sizzled as they hit the ground. We didn't dare linger any longer, turning and sprinting away. After running several dozen meters, I couldn't help but glance back. The creature remained at the center of the sea of fire. Normally, napalm sticks and burns wherever it lands. Even thick iron plates would soften under its heat. But the creature showed no intention of fleeing. It slowly twisted its body in the flames, like an eel writhing in mud, its segmented flesh repeatedly grinding against the ground. With each movement, the gravel, frozen soil, and burning gasoline on the ground were pressed into the skin folds that opened along its sides. Those folds opened and closed like countless mouths, breathing simultaneously, swallowing the flames and scorching debris into the gaps of its body. The fire couldn't burn through its outer skin. Instead, it was entirely enveloped within its body. Only faint, flickering crimson light could be seen seeping through the gaps in its segmented flesh, eerily reminiscent of lightning hidden within dark clouds. At that moment, it was a freely moving, living roller of muscle and fire. Wrapped in raging flames, it remained unignited itself, though its skin emitted wisps of white smoke from the intense heat. Its originally dark red hue had turned charred black, its surface now covered in countless tiny blisters. Then it charged straight toward us. It used to crawl slowly and clumsily, but now it had completely transformed. Each fleshy segment of its body expanded and contracted to its limit, using powerful recoil to propel its massive, thousands of tons frame forward like a piston. With each segment firing in succession, dozens of them working together, its speed instantly peaked, 10 times faster than our full sprint. The moment it charged at high speed, the entire ground shook violently. Not just ordinary tremors, but sharp upward heaves. As I ran, the frozen soil beneath my feet suddenly buckled, launching me into the air before I crashed back down. All the bone spikes on its body extended fully, scraping across the frozen ground at high speed and plowing deep trenches. The friction of the spikes against the earth produced a high-pitched screech, identical to the sound of a chainsaw cutting through stone. Droplets of gasoline spilled from its body, igniting as they fell. The freshly plowed trenches were filled with flames, tracing lines of fire across the snowy white tundra. My teammate James was running at the back of the group. He wasn't slow, tall, and with a long stride. He should have been the fastest, but he couldn't resist glancing back, and that 1 second pause caused him to stumble, falling half a step behind. A massive bone spike at the front of the creature suddenly shot toward him. This spike was far larger than the others, as long as 2 telephone poles combined, with a texture like aged ivory and a surface glowing with a scorching dark red. James desperately threw himself forward to dodge, but the spike still pierced through his body diagonally from his lower back. The spike went straight through him, emerging from the front of his bulletproof vest, shattering the hard ceramic plate instantly. James was impaled on the spike, hanging in the air like laundry hung out to dry. He didn't lose consciousness immediately. A piercing scream erupted, drowning out the roar of the surrounding inferno. His limbs flailed desperately, and he let out continuous cries of agony. No words, just raw, excruciating pain. With James still impaled on its spike, The creature charged forward another dozen meters. The next second, the front half of its body whipped violently, like a cracking whip. James was flung through the air, tracing an arc before crashing heavily into the burning wreckage of the train. His screams persisted until the moment he hit the ground, then fell completely silent. Wilson was sprinting beside me, his face covered in soot, with two clear white streaks left by tears cut through the grime. His mouth kept opening and closing, but my ears were ringing so loudly I couldn't hear a thing. Only the tense, desperate expression on his face was clear. The creature didn't pause for even a moment. After flinging James aside, it immediately adjusted its direction and continued charging toward us at high speed. Its bone spikes scraped against the ground, sending sparks flying, while its body was engulfed in roaring flames. From a distance, it looked like a giant rolling fireball across the tundra, with the massive, segmented shadow of its writhing form clearly visible at its core. Up ahead, Joey shouted a warning. He found a raised mound of frozen soil with a shallow depression beneath it, just enough space for the three of us to hide. Joey jumped into the pit first, Wilson tumbled in after him, and I threw myself in last. Lying in the pit with my cheek pressed against the cold, frozen soil, I felt the ground's relentless vibrations reverberating through my bones. With every inch the creature drew closer, the tremors grew stronger, rattling my cheekbones. I lifted my head slightly to peer over the edge of the pit. It was less than 200 meters away now. The folds of skin on its sides kept opening and closing, each time revealing a dark red glow from within. The vertical slit on its head was fully open, with layers of averted cartilage continuously spewing scorching orange-red heat. Then, I saw it suddenly change direction. It was no longer charging toward us. Covered in unburned gasoline and wrapped in raging flames, it turned and rolled toward the undamaged train cars behind it, the ones loaded with thousands of tons of high explosive ammunition. Joey stared intently in that direction, his mouth slowly falling open. I could make out the shape of his words. He said, "We're done." Suddenly, Joey climbed up from beside me. I reached out to grab him, but couldn't hold him back. He stood up abruptly and hurried out of the pit, still clutching his rifle. It stopped dragging a long line in the frozen soil. His face was blackened by smoke, only the whites of his eyes and his teeth visible. His jaw was clenched tight, his expression terrifying. He threw his rifle to the ground, then quickly began pulling equipment from his body, his movements frantic. Blocks of C4 explosives, bundles of detonators, and detonation cords, all laid out neatly at his feet. Wilson shouted at him, but I couldn't hear a thing. Joey paid no attention, crouching intently in front of the explosives. He wrapped the C4 and detonators around his body with duct tape, first stuffing his chest pockets full, then inserting the detonators and tightly binding everything in place with layer after layer of tape. For the hard-to-reach spots on his back, he forced his arms backward, his shoulder joints cracking audibly. He muttered under his breath, "It's just a moving wall of flesh. I'll blow it apart, blast it into pieces." His voice was low, but it carried an unsettling calm, completely unlike his usual lazy demeanor. Each word seemed trapped in his throat. After wrapping the final strip of tape, he stood up, clutching the detonator tightly in his hand. The red light on the detonator blinked on and off, casting his face in alternating flashes of red and black. Joey started walking out immediately. Wilson lunged forward to pull him back, but Joey shoved him hard with an elbow, sending him tumbling back into the pit. I immediately raised my gun to cover him. My hand was shaking so badly I couldn't steady the weapon. The muzzle jumped erratically, and every shot went wide, some flying skyward, others kicking up plumes of snow. I couldn't stop pulling the trigger, firing until the magazine was empty, then instinctively squeezing twice more. The creature noticed Joey charging toward it. It halted its movement toward the ammunition car and slowly turned around. Embers still clung to its body, its wrinkled surface opening and closing, emitting a faint reddish glow. The fissure at its front aimed directly at Joey. Joey didn't stop. He staggered forward toward the creature, swaying as if drunk, the explosives strapped to him clinking together softly. The tape constricted his breathing, and as he ran, heavy, ragged gasps escaped his throat. Suddenly, the skin around the creature's fissure tensed instantly, stretching as taut and smooth as a drumhead. A large mass of pale yellow mucus shot out from the fissure with tremendous force, like water from a high-pressure hose, slamming directly into Joey's face and chest. The mucus covered Joey entirely, steaming and sizzling as it met the cold air. Covered in the slime, Joey forced himself forward 3 more steps. As he tried to take a 4th step, his legs suddenly locked up. His knee remained bent, suspended mid-air, completely unable to lower, as if his joints had instantly seized. Then his arms froze too, his hands still clenched around the detonator, fingers stiff and unable to bend. Joey stood frozen in the snow, locked in a charging stance, his entire body like a statue. The mucus dried unusually fast, quickly forming a pale, hard shell that slowly seeped into his skin. His complexion turned waxy and semi-transparent, completely immobilized by the rigid casing. He wasn't unconscious. His eyes still moved slowly, shifting back and forth toward us through the thin shell. His mouth, glued shut by the mucus, struggled violently. His jaw strained beneath, his entire face trembling slightly, but he couldn't break free. The red light on the detonator at his chest continued to blink steadily. Wilson knelt in the pit, staring blankly at Joey, mouth agape, his whole body frozen. I stood rooted to the spot too, my magazine empty, forced to watch helplessly as the shell around Joey grew thicker. The creature paused less than 100 meters away from him, slowly closed its fissure as if nothing had happened, and began crawling slowly toward the car loaded with high explosive ammunition. I forced myself to calm down and quickly reviewed what had just happened. Every way this creature harmed others relied entirely on its own physical exertion, using muscle contractions to crush train cars, using bone spikes to impale people, spraying mucus to immobilize targets. It could have killed Joey outright with its bone spikes, just like it did with James, but it chose instead to trap him with mucus. It hit me then. The mucus was just its method for neutralizing threats. Its real lethal attacks relied on the power of its own muscles and body segments. If we could cripple its muscular and segmental power, it would lose its ability to kill. I looked down beside my feet. A section of broken rail lay on the ground. When the car was crushed earlier, this piece of track had been torn up and flung here. It was over half a meter long, as thick as an arm, with a fractured end whose edges were sharp as blades. I watched the creature's crawling motion. It moved entirely by extending and contracting its body segments, propelled by muscular contractions. An idea formed in my mind. Instead of attacking it from the outside, we needed to lure it into coiling around and crushing itself against this sharp, broken rail. Use its own immense, car-crushing strength to make it injure itself. I hoisted the broken section of rail onto my shoulder. It was heavier than it looked. The cold, fractured, and felt unnervingly sticky against my hand. Carrying the rail, I ran out of the shallow pit, sprinting forward across the frozen ground, my shoulder aching under the heavy iron beam. Wilson shouted behind me, but my ears were ringing, and I couldn't make out his words. I didn't dare look back. There was no time to waste. The creature continued to advance relentlessly, now less than 50 meters away from the ammunition car, loaded with high explosive shells and napalm barrels. Thousands of tons of high-risk explosives lay exposed on the tracks. Yet the monster's focus remained fixed solely on the cars, completely unaware of my flanking maneuver. The flames on its body had yet to die down, and with every movement, sparks flew from its form. I ran to the ground the creature had just crushed, where the frozen soil had been compacted into a hard surface. I unshouldered the rail I was carrying, gripped it firmly with both hands, and positioned the sharp, broken end upward, aiming it directly in the path of the approaching monster. I put all my strength into driving the rail into the frozen ground, but my physical effort alone wasn't enough to embed it deeply. I threw my entire weight onto the rail, pressing down with all my might until half of it was firmly lodged in the earth. The exposed end stood sharp and menacing. Crouching down, I pulled out my last flare gun, dismantled it, and scraped out every last bit of the pink smoke-producing powder inside. The powder reeked strongly of sulfur. I coated the entire broken end of the rail thickly with it, making sure every sharp edge was thoroughly covered. I repeatedly smashed the flare gun until the barrel was deformed and the handle broke, then tossed it aside. After that, I ran back about a dozen steps, turned around, raised my weapon, and took aim. At the front of the creature's body was a vertical slit, opening and closing rhythmically, continuously emitting white vapor. I fixed my aim on this slit and pulled the trigger. The first few bullets struck the edges and depths of the slit. With each hit, the soft tissue within convulsed violently. I emptied the entire magazine in one go. By the fifth shot, the creature, which had been fixated on the cars, suddenly turned and locked onto my position. The slit on the creature's front now faced me directly. It could open extremely wide, its inner walls coated with a sticky fluid that glistened eerily in the firelight. With my gun empty, I discarded it immediately and turned to sprint sideways with all my might. The creature gave chase instantly, propelling itself forward rapidly with its segmented body, the dull thuds of its movement growing louder and closer. The grating sound of its bony spikes scraping against the ground echoed sharply behind me. The ground shook continuously. As I ran, my foot suddenly caught, and I twisted my ankle badly. A sharp pain shot up my leg. I didn't dare stop, limping onward in a desperate run until my entire leg went numb, losing all sensation as I pounded across the frozen soil. I headed straight for the rail trap I had set up, the monster hot on my heels. The firelight dyed the snowy ground orange-red, and my shadow stretched longer and longer, a clear sign it was closing in. Soon, I could smell the creature's pungent odor, a mix of decay, scorching, and sulfur, so strong it made me gag. With only 10 meters left, I clearly saw the pink powder on the rails broken in, glowing fluorescent in the firelight. The sharp edges aimed directly at the pursuing monster. Instead of veering away from the trap, I charged right toward it. At the last moment, I pushed off hard with my right foot and threw myself sideways, crashing onto the frozen ground. The monster, moving at full speed, had too much momentum to stop. It slammed straight into the rail trap. A low, deafening thud echoed as the sharp, broken end of the rail pierced precisely into the weakest gap between the creature's body segments, sinking over a meter deep. This was the softest part of its body, and the thin skin was instantly torn open by the sharp edges. Instinctively, the monster initiated a constricting motion, tightening all its muscles at once in an attempt to crush the rail lodged in its body. But the more it contracted, the more it used its own strength to saw and cut itself apart from the inside with the sharp rail. After a series of dense, muffled sounds, the creature's body was torn open from within. A crack over 10 meters long spread along its segmented form. No blood flowed from the wound. Instead, a massive amount of pale yellow mucus gushed out wildly, flooding forth like a breached dam. The tremendous force ejected the rail from its body, sending it crashing heavily to the ground. In the next moment, the creature's muscles went limp, its taut body collapsing completely. All its bony spikes retracted. The front half of its body, which had been raised high, paused midair for an instant before crashing down to the ground with a thunderous impact that shook the earth violently. The creature didn't die immediately, but twitched weakly, its movements growing increasingly sluggish. With each convulsion, more mucus poured from the wound, freezing slowly on the frozen soil and forming puddles. It had completely lost the ability to fight. The rail had severed its connective tissues, rendering it incapable of moving or attacking. Using my gun stock for support, I slowly rose to my feet. My right leg had long gone numb, devoid of sensation. Limping, I slowly made my way toward Joey. Joey stood not far away, still frozen in a charging stance, his entire body encased in a dry, hardened shell, unmoving, but his eyes could still move. As I approached, his pupils noticeably contracted. I reversed my rifle and used the blunt back of the bayonet to slowly chip away at the hardened shell encasing Joey's wrist. Following the cracks, I carefully dismantled it until the cuff of his military uniform was exposed beneath. Joey's stiff fingers gradually regained sensation, curling inward one by one. He was still clutching the detonator with its blinking red light tightly in his hand. I gently pried his fingers open, removed the fuse, and after the red light went out, placed the detonator back into his palm. Through the remaining layer of shell, Joey's eyes met mine, his pupils shifting slightly. I could clearly see the glistening moisture in them. I sat down beside Joey, stretching out my swollen and numb right leg, and tossed my rifle aside, completely drained of energy. Behind us, the creature's convulsions grew increasingly faint. The continuously oozing mucus, still warm, slowly solidified on the frozen ground. The pungent mix of odors in the air remained strong, making it hard to breathe. Heavy snow began to fall from the sky. Large flakes landed on the creature and its mucus, melting quickly, while those that reached the ground accumulated slowly. Just then, Wilson emerged from a shallow pit, his legs unsteady as he stumbled and staggered toward us. He looked down at Joey and me, his lips moving several times without a word coming out. In the distance, the damaged locomotive was lodged in the creature's body, its windows completely shattered. The first two cars had been twisted into scrap metal, while the ammunition car behind remained intact. The smell of napalm still lingered in the air. The dangerous standoff had finally come to a temporary end. By the time the helicopter arrived, I had been sitting beside Joey for a full 4 hours. The helicopter's rotor blades whipped up a fierce wind, scattering the snow on the ground. Snowflakes stung my face like grains of sand. I kept my head down, staring at my boots. After stepping in the creature's mucus, the soles had been corroded. Half the rubber had peeled away, exposing the sock beneath. The sock was worn through, and my exposed toes were purple from the cold, stiff and numb. The creature behind us still twitched faintly, moving only once every few seconds, its strength nearly gone. Only the surface muscles occasionally spasmed. The massive wound on its body had stopped gushing mucus, now only seeping slowly along its contours onto the frozen ground. The edges of the wound were torn open, the damaged tissue frozen stiff and coated with a thin layer of frost. I'd already used the back of my bayonet to break away most of the shell covering Joey. His hands were fully exposed, with only fragments remaining on his arms, but his fingers were now flexible. Ever since I removed the fuse and returned the detonator to him, he had been clutching it tightly, his knuckles white. His eyelids had slowly regained sensation, blinking infrequently as he watched me quietly, his eyes still glistening but never shedding a tear. Wilson hadn't stayed with us. He had walked alone to the wreckage of the train, squatting in front of the twisted cars, head bowed and motionless, lost in thought. When the rescue team helped me up, my arms were completely limp, hanging uselessly at my sides, my fingers stiff and splayed, unable to close. A team member cut open the leg of my pants, revealing my ankle swollen to a dark purple-black, the skin stretched taut and shiny. As they removed my ruined boot, the detached rubber sole took a layer of dead skin with it. I was lifted into the helicopter, the door left open as cold air rushed into the cabin. Sitting by the door, I looked down at the snowy landscape below. The broken tracks, shattered sleepers, and twisted wreckage of the cars remained where they were. The creature's massive body lay sprawled across the frozen ground, its segmented form stretching into the distance, its tail hidden in the blizzard. The mucus seeping from its wound had frozen, forming a large yellow ice sheet on the snow, covered by a thin layer of frost. The snow continued to fall, slowly blanketing the creature and the ice, gradually obscuring the chaos. Wilson was the last aboard. He leaned against the cabin wall, eyes closed, clutching something tightly in his hand. I couldn't make out what it was. The helicopter slowly ascended, the scene below growing smaller. I took one last look at the battlefield. The shattered tracks, the wrecked cars, the creature's body on the frozen ground, and the festering yellow ice sheet on the snowfield. As the door slowly closed, the howling wind abruptly ceased. In a sudden silence, I could clearly hear my own teeth chattering uncontrollably.